In a quiet coastal town in America, there stood an old mansion. This mansion belonged to a famous businessman, Richard Anderson. Richard's first wife had died many years ago. They had a daughter, Amelia, innocent, kind-hearted, and the apple of her father's eye. But not long after, Richard married a second time. His life with his new wife, Margaret, changed, but Amelia's life turned into a terrible prison. Amelia often sat in her room reading books, looking at old photos, or shedding tears in memory of her mother. There was always one question in her heart. If only my mother were alive, then I wouldn't have to suffer so much. Margaret, her stepmother, was a greedy woman for property. She had two sons, Alan and Mark. Alan was hard-hearted, cruel, and greedy like her mother. But Mark was gentle and sensitive. He wanted Amelia like his real sister. Margaret always spoke ill of Amelia. One day at the dinner table she taunted, "This girl is stealing the peace of my house. As long as she lives, you two brothers will never get your father's property." Alan said immediately, "Alan, don't worry, mother. We'll find a way." Mark hesitated. "Mark, but she's our sister." Margaret stared at Mark. "Margaret, remember, she's not your sister. She's the biggest obstacle to your future." Mark fell silent, but his heart began to ache inside. A few days later, Margaret secretly said to Alan, "Margaret, tonight we will end it forever. Far from the city, in the depths of the sea. There will be no evidence there." Alan said with a cold smile, "Alan, okay Mom, it will all end tonight." Mark heard all this. His heart was broken. He began to think, will they really throw their sister into the sea? Well, I will never let her die. In the darkness of the night, the waves of the sea were making noise. The sky was covered with clouds and even the moon looked scared. Amelia was brought onto the boat under cover. She was innocent, she had no idea. "Where are we going? Why does everything seem so secret?" Alan said sternly. "Alan, shut up. You will find out everything." Margaret said with a mocking laugh. "Margaret, just be a guest for a while. Then you will find peace forever." In the depths of the sea, Amelia's heart trembled. She cried, "Amelia, Mom, why are you doing this? What have I done to you?" Margaret shouted, "Margaret, your existence is my greatest harm." Saying this, Alan tied Amelia's hands with ropes. She resisted but was weak. Mark was standing in a corner, trembling. Tears were flowing from his eyes. The boat reached the middle of the sea. The wind was strong, the waves were rising. Margaret signaled to Alan, "Margaret, now is the time." Alan brutally grabbed Amelia and carried her to the shore. Amelia was screaming, "Amelia, for God's sake, leave me alone. I don't want to die. Please." Mark's heart started to explode. But he couldn't say anything for fear of his mother. Suddenly, Alan pushed hard. Amelia screamed and fell into the dark sea. The waves began to swallow her. In the dark night sea, Amelia was at the mercy of the waves. Her hands were tied with ropes and she was trying to breathe hard. She was sinking and rising. There was only darkness and water in front of her eyes. Only one voice was echoing in her heart. "Is this really how my life will end?" The boat reached the shore again. Margaret and Alan had smiles of victory on their faces. But Mark's heart was breaking inside. He remained silent, but Amelia's screams were still ringing in his ears. He could not sleep all night. A few hours later, Mark made up an excuse and came back to the shore. He was peering into the water near the shore like a madman. Suddenly, he saw someone lying half dead near the bushes in the distance. It was Amelia, unconscious but alive. Mark quickly ran and picked her up in his arms and said, crying, "Thank God you are alive, sister. I will never let you die." Mark carefully hid her in an old room, a dilapidated hut some distance from the shore. He arranged for a blanket, water, and food there. When Amelia regained consciousness, she said in a weak voice, "Mark, Why did you save me? You're afraid of your mother, aren't you? Mark held her hand and said, You're not just a half-sister to me, you're my real sister. Even if I get all the wealth in the world, I can't let you die. Tears started flowing from Amelia's eyes. She knew that this brother was her shield. But Mark warned her, No one must know that you're alive. If Mother or Alan find out, they'll try again. You have to hide here until I take care of everything. On the other hand, Margaret had announced in the city that Amelia had drowned in a boat accident. People came to mourn, but Margaret's eyes shone with satisfaction instead of sadness. Alan was also smiling happily. But as time passed, they felt that Mark was hiding something. There was a strange uneasiness in his eyes. One night, Alan searched Mark's room and found the old hut. A devilish smile spread across his face. He said to himself, If this is true, then very soon she will be in my hands again, and this time she will not be able to escape. Amelia and Mark had no idea that their biggest secret was now in danger. The night was deep. Amelia sat quietly inside the hut, peering out the window. She was afraid that if her stepmother or Alan found out, they would destroy her again. Mark brought her food and drink every night. He encouraged his sister, but there was fear in his eyes. One day, Mark was very late in returning from the beach. Alan followed him to the hut. He peeked in from a distance and saw that her breath was still. Amelia was alive, weak but breathing. A wicked smile spread across Alan's face. He slowly turned back and said to himself, Now the game will be more interesting. I won't tell Mom yet. I'll get her under control first. The next morning, Margaret asked Mark with a suspicious look, Where do you keep going at night? Are you hiding something from me? Mark lied and said, No, Mom, I just sit by the sea. I miss my sister. Margaret looked into his eyes for a long time but said nothing. Meanwhile, in the hut, Amelia said to Mark, I think someone is following us. It was like someone was close last night. Mark comforted, Don't worry, nothing will happen to you as long as I am here. But a storm had broken out in his heart. Suddenly, in the evening, there was a loud knock on the door. Amelia trembled. When Mark opened the door, Alan was standing in front of him. There was a look of mischief in his eyes and a poisonous smile on his lips. He came in, and as soon as he saw Amelia, he laughed. Wow! So this is the secret you were hiding. You have betrayed your mother so perfectly. Amelia stepped back in fear. Mark stood in front of her and said angrily, If you take even one step forward, I will tell everyone how you and your mother threw him into the sea. Anger flared in Alan's eyes. He came closer to Mark and said, Little brother, you are forgetting that there is more power than truth here. And the power has always been with my mother and me. You cannot stop us. Tears welled up in Amelia's eyes. She told Mark, They will not leave us now. Mark replied in a strong tone, As long as I am alive, I will not let anything happen to you. The darkness of the night was growing and the fire of hostility had already burned inside the hut. Alan said a sentence as he left. Now the game has begun. And look, this time no one will be able to save you. After Alan left, a silent fear settled in the hut. Amelia lay awake all night. She knew that now her life was in greater danger than ever. Mark also decided in his heart that if Alan stepped forward again, he would bring everything to the fore. The next morning, Alan told his mother everything. Margaret was surprised at first. Then her eyes turned red with anger. This girl is still alive. This time she has to be finished. Otherwise everything will get out of our hands. Margaret and Alan planned to force Amelia to come forward herself. They began to spread a rumor in the town that new documents had been found in Richard's estate, which would only be completed with Amelia's signature. This news reached Amelia's ears, and for the first time, hope arose in her heart that she might be able to get her lost life back. Mark stopped her, saying, This is their trap, it will be dangerous for you to come out. But Amelia insisted, I can't hide forever. I have to come out one day. That night, there was a party in the city, where all the big people had gathered. Margaret and Ellen were also there, fully convinced that Amelia would not come out. But at that moment, a thin, veiled girl entered the hall door. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her. Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. She stood up from her seat. This is impossible. Ellen's lips also trembled. When Amelia removed the veil, a sensation spread in the hall. People wondered how she was alive. Margaret looked towards the door in panic, as if looking for a way to escape. Amelia said in a strong voice, "I am the one you wanted to bury in the sea, but God gave me a new life. And now I have come to take back the trust my mother gave me." Silence fell in the hall, but in that silence the knock of the approaching storm could be clearly heard. Everyone in the hall was filled with surprise and questions. The news of Amelia's survival spread like wildfire. There was sweat on Margaret's forehead, anger and fear in Alan's eyes. They both signaled to each other and left. Mark stood behind Amelia. He said softly, "I told you this was dangerous. They won't let you go now." Amelia replied, "I'm not going to run away now. The truth will come out in front of everyone." That night, Margaret and Alan hatched a new plot. Alan ordered his men to bring Amelia back from the hut and get her out of the way forever. The next morning, when Mark arrived at the hut with food, everything inside was in disarray. The door was broken and Amelia was missing. Mark lost consciousness. In the evening, Alan had tied Amelia to a chair near the beach. Her hands were tightly bound and there were tears on her face. Alan said with a venomous smile, "There will be no miracle this time. The sea will once again become your graveyard." Margaret stood nearby and said coldly, "This is the last game. After this, everything will be ours." Mark watched this scene from a distance. He shouted, "Alan, if you touch her, I will tell everyone the truth, to the police, to the court." Alan laughed. "What evidence do you have? Who will believe you?" The tension in the air increased. The waves of the sea began to roar as if they were also witnesses to this scene. Amelia cast a last hopeful look at Mark, and Mark said resolutely, "I will save you at all costs, even if I have to give my life." The wind picked up, the sky was covered with clouds. Everything was moving towards a decisive turn. The waves of the sea were crashing hard, like thundering clouds in the sky, eager to witness some great decision. Amelia was tied to a chair and Alan was moving forward with a threatening smile. Margaret stood behind, greed and pride in her eyes. Mark suddenly came running from the seashore. He picked up a stone and threw it at Alan, and then attacked him with all his might. A fierce fight broke out between the two brothers. Alan threw Mark to the ground and said angrily, "You always get in my way. Now you have to finish me off." At that moment, police sirens were heard. The few people in the hall who had seen Amelia's return had spread the news, and the law had also been set in motion. Before the police arrived, Alan tried to push Amelia into the sea in a last-ditch effort, but Mark pulled her back with all his might. Both of them lost their balance, and Alan himself fell into the strong waves of the sea. Margaret started to run, but the police caught her there. Defeat and hatred burned in her eyes. Amelia was freed. She hugged Mark and cried bitterly, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be alive today." The police began to handcuff Margaret. Amelia said loudly, "This is the end of greed and cruelty. Whoever tries to take away the rights of others, one day loses everything." Mark looked into his sister's eyes and said softly, "You don't need to fear anyone anymore. Your original home, your honor and rights have all been restored." The waves of the sea seemed to calm down. The dark night was over and a new morning was dawning in Amelia's life.